There's a psychological secret that can completely transform the way you live. A quiet turning point, yet so powerful, that once you reach it, not even criticism, judgment, or the most painful losses can shake you. But this point doesn't come with time. It comes with awareness. Most people live trapped in automatic reactions, trying to control the outside while ignoring what pulses within. Carl Jung saw this with brutal clarity. He discovered that we don't become strong by resisting the world, but by integrating what we deny in ourselves. And when that happens, when this silent process settles in, nothing and no one can affect you anymore. And throughout this video, you'll understand why so many people feel emotionally unstable. Even though they seem strong on the outside, you'll see where your triggers are really born, and how to deactivate them without shutting yourself off from the world. But most importantly, you'll discover a place within yourself where the world can still touch you, but can no longer knock you down. So watch until the end if you're ready to finally stop caring about what was never meant to affect you in the first place. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, take a moment to do it now, because here, every video takes you one step deeper toward who you really are. Someone criticizes you, another ignores you. A subtle jab comes your way, just to test your limits. And surprisingly, nothing inside you flinches. No automatic defenses, no urge to strike back. Just a strange and powerful feeling. Peace. It's like you finally stopped dancing to the tune the world keeps playing. This state isn't coldness, nor is it indifference. It's psychic freedom. An inner space where emotions can exist, but no longer dictate your direction. When the soul finds that place, something fundamental shifts. The center of experience stops being out there and starts being within you. So, what changes when you're no longer controlled by the outside world? Carl Jung gives a simple but brutally honest answer. What affects you, controls you. What you integrate, sets you free. What he suggests isn't resisting the world, toughening up so you won't break. It's something else. It's recognizing what still vibrates, still bleeds, still reacts inside you. And from there, holding it with presence. Not to fake strength, but to access real strength, the kind that comes from clarity. Reacting is the ego's default mode. It's the emotional body trying to protect itself from what it doesn't understand. But when you observe the movement before you fuse with it, when you feel without getting lost in it, you begin to break free from what affects you. This isn't about becoming immune, it's about becoming whole. Freedom in this sense doesn't mean the absence of pain. It means the absence of dependence on others' validation. It's realizing that external discomfort is just the surface. What really throws you off center runs deeper, and that's where change begins. You don't silence the world. You silence the part of you that still confuses itself with it. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. The world will keep provoking, testing, pushing buttons. The difference is, now you're anchored somewhere else. The ego is no longer in the driver's seat, and when that happens, the things that used to move you, criticism, silence, rejection, lose their power to drag you down. Still, the old impulse doesn't vanish overnight. It still shows up. Fast, instinctive, ready to react. The first reaction is usually the loudest. Criticism hits, and in a split second, the ego is already in combat mode. It's such an automatic reflex that you barely have time to notice what was actually touched. To the ego, any discomfort feels like a threat, and it rushes to keep the illusion of control alive. That control is just that, an illusion, an internal play where the ego acts out the role of stability. If I explain myself well, they won't judge me. If I look confident, they won't attack me. But this effort has deeper roots. The fear of being exposed, the dread of appearing weak, inadequate, out of place. When that pain gets touched, the ego kicks in to cover it up, like trying to put out a fire with your bare hands. That's why even shallow criticism can spark exaggerated reactions. It's not the criticism that hurts, it's what it activates. Jung said that the ego, when disconnected from the rest of the psyche, becomes a desperate defender of its own image. The more insecure it is inside, the more rigid it becomes on the outside. Sensitivity turns into weaponry, rigidity, a false fortress. In this process, the ego turns any disagreement into a personal attack, and any silence becomes rejection. Everything becomes about it. But this is just a symptom of a wound that hasn't been faced. Every overreaction is, deep down, a cry for help disguised as defense. But that reactive movement doesn't solve anything. It only postpones. The pain stays alive, tucked away in a dark corner of consciousness, waiting for the next trigger. And the more you respond on autopilot, the further you drift from what you're actually feeling. The way out begins the moment you notice the impulse and choose not to follow it. That instant when you take a breath before acting is the crack where light gets in. And it's in that space between stimulus and response that you begin to break free from the ego's grip and take back control of your own experience. Every time someone gets under your skin, there's something deeper going on than it seems. The intensity of your reaction rarely has to do only with the other person. Most of the time, it reveals a blind spot, something you don't want to see, but that's there, operating in the shadows. The shadow, as Jung defined it, is the sum of everything you've repressed, denied, or rejected in yourself. Not out of malice, but out of a need to be accepted. From a young age, we learn what can and can't be shown, what is beautiful, praised, and what is shameful or frowned upon. Whatever doesn't fit gets swept under the psychic rug, but what is hidden doesn't disappear, it grows stronger. These denied parts form a kind of autonomous energy. They don't want to be ignored. And so, they often show up in our interactions with others. That moment when someone gets under your skin for no obvious reason. The irritation, the judgment, the disproportionate discomfort are usually clear signs that something in your shadow has been touched. The other acts like a mirror, but the reflection can be unbearable. The shadow isn't a monster. It's everything you've hidden because it wasn't acceptable. It can include qualities you don't even recognize in yourself out of fear, envy, or insecurity. The courage you don't express, the creativity you suppress, the anger you won't admit to feeling. All of it ends up there, and the more you deny it, the more exposed you become. Because what isn't integrated controls you from the sidelines. Think of the shadow as a psychic echo. When the light of awareness hits something that's been buried, that echo screams. It feels like the discomfort is coming from outside, but its source is internal. It's as if life constantly places people and situations in your path to remind you of what you've tried to forget. The good news is that this exposure is also an opportunity. Every time you feel that sudden irritation, that anger without a clear reason, you're facing a chance to observe, to name, to accept that this too is a part of you, even if you don't yet know what to do with it. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean identifying with it. It means recognizing its existence without running away. Only then does it lose the power to pull you from the inside every time the world pokes at you. The pain you feel isn't always about what just happened. Sometimes, what seems like a simple comment, a gesture, a silence, triggers something much bigger. It's like that situation pressed a button that's been inside you for a long time. That button has a name: emotional complex. For Jung, complexes are clusters of emotions, memories, and images that form around an unresolved experience. They're living cores within the psyche, autonomous, intense, and at times, unpredictable. When a complex is triggered, it takes over, as if, for a few seconds, you stop being yourself. The reaction doesn't come from the now, but from a past still living inside you. That's why being ignored can hurt more than it logically should. What really hurts isn't what's happening now. It's the old abandonment still pulsing. The emotional complex acts like an open wound, always ready to react. The person who ignored you in that moment might not have had any bad intention, but the impact is disproportionate because emotional memory overrides reality. These complexes can be tied to many experiences: rejection, humiliation, being undervalued, abandonment, injustice. Each one carries its own internal story. When triggered, it makes you feel like you're reliving everything, even if the current situation is totally different. And the worst part, you often don't even realize it's happening. Jung said that when a complex is activated, it behaves like a small personality within the person. It has its own voice, its own beliefs, its own automatic responses. It's like being temporarily possessed by a part of you that's still scared, defensive, and childlike. Healing begins when you recognize this mechanism. When in the middle of the reaction, you ask yourself, what did this really touch in me? That moment of awareness is where something starts to shift. The emotion stops being an enemy to be fought and becomes a signal. A message that something inside you still needs to be seen. The real trigger is never outside. It's only activated from the outside in. The content, the pain, the memory, all of that was already there. But now, you begin to have the chance to look at it instead of just reacting. And that changes everything. When emotion arises, the first impulse is to get rid of it. to repress, hide, rationalize, to call it an overreaction, weakness, or drama. But this urge to silence what you feel is what disconnects you from yourself. Emotion doesn't come to sabotage. It comes to inform. Every emotion carries a message, an unheard need, a part of you that wants to be acknowledged. Anger, sadness, fear. Each one is a symbol, an internal code waiting to be interpreted. Anger may be the cry of a crossed boundary. Sadness, the signal that something needs closure. Fear, a call for caution in the face of the unknown. When you treat emotion as the enemy, you lose the chance to learn from it. But when you listen closely, it shows you exactly where your presence is still needed. Jung didn't see emotions as system failures. He saw them as living content, full of psychic energy, demanding attention and processing. And there's an essential difference between containment and repression. Repression is suffocating, pretending you're not feeling something. Containment is the opposite. It's recognizing what's there and creating a safe space for it to exist without taking over. That's where the metaphor of the alchemical vessel comes in. In alchemy, the vessel is the container where raw elements are placed to transform. It doesn't explode, it doesn't break, it holds the intensity of the process. When you contain an emotion, you become your own vessel, a container capable of withstanding the boil without breaking, without spilling onto others, without needing to cancel yourself. That's not repression, that's alchemy. Repression pushes things into the unconscious. Containment allows emotion to exist, but under a consciousness that observes, feels, and holds. Emotions aren't system errors. They're direct messages from the soul. Anger might be showing that a line was crossed. Fear, that you're facing the unknown and need to prepare. Sadness, that something important was lost and deserves to be honored. None of these emotions are negative by themselves. The problem isn't feeling, it's not knowing what to do with what you feel. Jung saw emotions as living symbols. Each one carries a meaning that goes beyond the immediate. The raw reaction is just the shell. If you stay present, you can access the deeper, truer content. At that point, emotion stops being a burden and becomes a portal. Symbolic containment is an essential concept. It means creating an inner space where emotion can move without overwhelming you. It's the opposite of exploding, but also of denial. It's the choice to feel deeply without getting lost, as if you were holding fire in your hands, not to get burned, but to understand its shape, its origin, its need. This ability to contain is what transforms emotion into awareness. Without it, you act on impulse. With it, you begin to discern. You start to see what comes from your own story, what belongs to the other, what deserves a response, and what simply needs to be breathed through until it passes. This emotional transmutation doesn't happen all at once. It requires practice, presence, and an honest willingness not to run. But every time you choose to contain rather than react, something inside you grows stronger. Not like someone who hardens, but like someone who becomes deeply rooted. True emotional strength isn't coldness. It's the ability to feel everything, to hold everything, and still choose what to do or not do. At this point, emotions stop dragging you around. They begin to reveal things to you. There's an almost invisible moment between what happens to you and what you do with what happens to you. A subtle gap, but absolutely decisive. That's where freedom lives. The freedom not to act on impulse, not to repeat old patterns, not to be just a reflection of your circumstances. That's where consciousness begins. When you react automatically, it's as if the situation makes the decision for you. But when you observe, even for a second, you reclaim your choice. The observing awareness doesn't try to control or suppress. It simply sees, with clarity, with presence, with silent firmness. And just by seeing, it begins to transform. Jung said consciousness is like a light, and when the light touches something that was previously unconscious, it loses part of its power over you. Watching anger without merging with it, feeling fear without running from it, naming pain without letting it consume you. Every time you do that, you affirm that you are not just what you feel, you are the one who feels. And that changes everything. This practice takes patience. At first, you might only realize it after you've already reacted. But over time, the space expands. You start to notice the heat rising before you yell, the tightness in your chest before you shut down, the urge to defend yourself even before being attacked. And in that noticing, there's power. The observing awareness is the beginning of contact with the self, the deepest and most whole part of your being. Unlike the ego, which wants to be right, look good, and stay protected, the self doesn't need to prove anything. It holds. It is. It sees. Being present with your own emotion without acting on impulse is a rare kind of courage. It's the opposite of passivity. It's pure internal activity. You don't run, you don't react, you don't repress. You hold. And that holding grows roots where there was only reactivity before. At that point, external situations still happen. People still speak, withdraw, disagree, provoke, but you're no longer on autopilot. The time of awareness has arrived, and with it, a new way of living is born. Less reaction, more choice. Less noise, more center. There is a place within you that doesn't need to explain, defend, or justify itself. A center that observes without hurry, without fear, without the urgency to be accepted. That place is the self. Unlike the ego, which is built from experiences, comparisons, and desires, the self is the silent core that's always been there. It isn't formed, it's revealed. Jung described the self as the organizer of the whole psyche, the deepest, most integrated, most stable part of the mind. It's not the absence of emotion or conflict, but the steady presence in the midst of them. When you're centered in the self, the world may try to pull you, but you no longer move on impulse. There's ground beneath your feet, a living, silent root that doesn't sway with every wind. The self shows up in small things, in the moment when you feel like shouting, but you breathe and listen. When you realize someone is provoking you, but you don't take the bait. When you choose silence, not out of avoidance, but because you know your peace doesn't depend on someone else's response. Silence from the self is not emptiness, it's depth. The self isn't interested in winning arguments. It doesn't seek to prove superiority or avoid conflict at all costs. It holds what needs to be held. That doesn't mean passivity. It means acting without being overtaken, speaking without being consumed, feeling without dissolving. It's an inner authority that doesn't shout, but is felt. Often, people confuse this strength with coldness. They think you've become distant, indifferent, unfeeling, but the truth is the opposite. You've become more whole. And because of that, you no longer need to spread yourself thin. Peace didn't come from escaping. It came from integration. When the ego is no longer in charge and the self takes over, a radical shift in perspective occurs. You still feel everything: discomfort, pain, joy, doubt, but they no longer hijack you. You realize you can hold all of these parts without needing to run, fight, or prove. Peace becomes something that doesn't depend on the outside world, because it's being cultivated from within. And when you anchor yourself in that place, the world may try to shake you, but your center is no longer out there. It's within you. Feeling pain isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign that something in you is still alive, sensitive, available. The idea that emotional maturity leads to numbness is a distortion. Growth doesn't eliminate pain. It just changes how you move through it. Before, pain swallowed you whole. Now you can walk with it. It still comes. Someone pulls away without explanation. A word cuts deep. A long silence weighs on your chest. But now there's a pause between the impact and the fall. You feel it, but you don't collapse. You hurt, but you don't dissolve. And that's a turning point. Because it's not about being stronger than pain. It's about not being defined by it. When the self is present, pain no longer needs to be denied or dramatized. It is welcomed with maturity. There's space for it to exist without consuming you. That space is what changes everything. Before, any wound triggered urgency, react, demand, flee, shut down. Now, urgency gives way to listening. You learn not to confuse yourself with what you feel. This is the heart of emotional integration. Allowing yourself to feel everything, but not being dragged by anything. Pain can pass through you, but it doesn't take control. It doesn't drive your decisions. It doesn't define who you are. It's acknowledged, named, and walked through with presence. That doesn't mean apathy. It means clarity. You still care, still connect, still get sad. But there's an internal boundary that keeps you from breaking. As if, even on the hardest days, there's something in you that remains standing. And it's not because the pain got smaller, it's because you grew. Instead of begging life to stop hurting, you begin to build an inner structure capable of holding whatever comes. There's no longer an expectation of a life without loss or frustration. There is instead the confidence that you can feel it all and still stay whole. In this new state, pain stops being an enemy to avoid. it becomes a teacher. It shows where there's still attachment, fear, idealization, and you listen without rushing to fix, because you know that if you stay present, the pain will pass, and you will remain. The urge to control everything is really a sophisticated form of fear of the unexpected, of rejection, of pain, of loss. The ego wants to predict, plan, ensure nothing strays from the script. But this quest for absolute control is exhausting, and worse, impossible. The more you try to control, the more vulnerable you become to what you can't. Jung warned, the desire for control comes from the attempt to avoid contact with the unknown within yourself. When you haven't yet acknowledged your own uncertainties, you project that anxiety outward. Life must be in order. People must respond the way you expect. Any deviation from the script becomes a threat, not because the world is hostile, but because you haven't yet learned to hold your own inner chaos. And chaos comes. It always does. In the form of sudden changes, other people's decisions, failures you didn't anticipate, reactions you couldn't control. And when control is your only strategy, every break in the plan feels like collapse. You don't just suffer because of what happened, you suffer because you couldn't stop it from happening. This is where surrender becomes wisdom. Not the surrender of giving up, but of trust. Trusting that there is something greater holding you. That life doesn't need to align perfectly with your plans to be meaningful. That you can handle whatever comes, even when you're not holding the reins. Accepting the uncontrollable isn't resignation, it's psychic maturity. It's when you realize you're not here to stop life from happening, but to learn how to stay whole in the face of what happens. That shift changes everything. Instead of arming yourself against it all, you begin to make space. Instead of stiffening up, you learn to bend. The more you anchor into your center, the less you need to have everything under control. People can make their own choices. Situations can unfold unpredictably. You remain present, observing, feeling, acting if necessary, but not out of panic. Ironically, it's when you stop trying to control everything that you begin to experience real power. A calm power that doesn't need to prove anything. It comes from inner solidity, not external manipulation. And in that space, chaos no longer consumes you. It passes, and you remain. Every time you choose not to react on autopilot, something silent and steady strengthens within you. It's not denial, nor escape. It's presence. It's an internal decision not to follow the impulse, not to feed the endless cycle of defense, attack, justification. That's where individuation begins. The process of becoming who you truly are. For Jung, individuation isn't an ideal to achieve. It's a path, a natural unfolding of awareness when it's no longer ruled solely by the ego. This process doesn't demand perfection, but truth. The truth of seeing your own patterns, the repetition of wounds, the zones of reactivity, and more importantly, the willingness to break the cycle. Conscious non-reaction is a kind of surrender. You don't give in to the impulse. You don't respond in the heat. You don't enter the fight just because you were provoked. This isn't passivity. It's trust. Trust that something deeper is holding your psyche, a more stable axis that doesn't need to win every battle to exist. Strength begins to come from silence, a dense silence, full of awareness, where there's no rush to explain and no fear of being quiet. You realize that the less you try to defend yourself, the clearer it becomes what truly matters. And the energy spent maintaining the ego's masks can be redirected towards something far more valuable: being whole. In this state, it's not that you stop caring, you stop getting lost. The provocation may still come, but you no longer chase it. You don't need to prove your worth every moment, nor make sure others understand you. Presence speaks louder than any reply. Individuation is, in large part, this inner shift, slowing down your reflexes and expanding your awareness. When you stop reacting, you begin to choose. And when you begin to choose, you begin to become. Not what others expect of you, not what your past shaped, but what is most essential and authentic within your psyche. There is no end to this process. It's continuous, daily, and sometimes imperceptible. But with each non-response that comes from the center, you move forward. And little by little, what once dominated you dissolves. Not because it's gone, but because you've stopped fighting it. And when you stopped fighting, you actually began to live. There comes a time when you realize that you no longer respond as you did before. The world remains what it is, with its pressures, contradictions, and noises. But inside you, something has changed. What used to hurt you deeply now only touches you. What used to throw you off track now just passes. And when you notice this, you understand. You are no longer a part. You've become the player. This change doesn't happen overnight. It's built in silence, behind the scenes of consciousness. Every choice not to react, every emotion contained with presence, every word you decide not to say, every trigger that you recognize and sustain without losing yourself. All of this is shaping a new center in you. Deeper, more stable, more free. Being free isn't about being immune to suffering. It's about no longer being defined by it. It's not closing yourself off from the world, but opening yourself up so fully that the world no longer needs to be controlled. Pain comes and goes. Criticism appears. Losses come, but you remain, because you have learned that you no longer have to overcome everything to be at peace. This freedom comes at a price. Responsibility for yourself. When you stop blaming the world, you start taking care of how you feel. When you stop wanting to control others, you start observing your own movement. It's scary at first, but it's also liberating, because you no longer have to wait for something outside to change. You have become the point of change. Now, every provocation becomes a mirror. Every discomfort, a warning. Every emotion, a message. And everything that used to hit you now teaches you. The game hasn't stopped, but you've stopped playing in automatic mode. Your response is no longer a reaction. It's a choice, and that completely changes the way you live. There's no longer any need to prove, correct, win, or run away. Silence is no longer the absence of speech. It's a sustaining presence. Calmness is no longer a disguise. It's the consequence of knowing where you are. And the other, with everything they bring, no longer determines who you are. You know yourself, and the soul that recognizes itself no longer needs to explain itself. If this made sense to you, if at some point in this video something inside you moved, then continue on this journey. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and follow us on this process of integration and awareness. Here, each piece of content is designed to help you build that inner freedom that no one can take away. And if you've made it this far, comment below, "I choose not to be a reaction anymore." This will be your way of marking that something has started to change. And now we'll see you in the next video.